Here to object.
I did too.
I'm gonna wait about another minute or so.
Totally okay. Make sure my eyesight's working.
Now, so,
I don't see any harm in getting started.
okay. Okay, well, it's 3 minutes after 6, so we'll call the meeting of the Planning Commission meeting to order. Tuesday, October the 15th, 2024. Roll call. Let the record reflect that everyone is present except for Rosalind Parks and Randy Camp. Approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No.
Then I'll accept a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve?
Second? Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, no. Agenda is approved. The minutes from the previous meeting, everybody had a chance to look over the minutes.
Yes.
Any
No.
changes? Okay, entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve?
Motion to approve and a second. Yes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. Report from Mr. Code Officer. I assume we'll do that in a minute.
I'll just go ahead and, I did have two things. We don't need to change the agenda, but we do have the next year's calendar prepared. I just did want to mention that there are no conflicts with any dates, so nothing out of the norm of what your Code of Ordinances charter says about meeting on the third Tuesday of each month. I think we had no conflicts at all, so I probably can handle that at the end if you would like to just move forward with next year's calendar. I don't think we'll be meeting next month. I don't see any need to unless you guys table this amendment tonight. But that way, because I don't think we're going to be meeting in December either, and so that way we can get that done for next year. There's nothing official, I think, that has to be taken. We've done it officially in the past, but I don't think there's anything that mandates you guys to do that. But the other thing I wanted to mention, too, is that I'd like to congratulate Laura Wilson. She is now the new City of Monroe City Clerk.
Hey, right.
She will still be representing us in her clerking duties, but big congratulations to Laura, big step up, and I wish her many years of success being the city clerk of Monroe. And that's all that I have.
Thank you. Old business, is there any old business to become before the commission? Hearing none. New business, under new business. Number one, zoning ordinance amendment. Mr. Code Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we got a bunch of these to go through, and I'm gonna try to be as painless as possible. It's not ever painless, just so you know. So there are a lot of amendments we're proposing that coincide with the adoption and inclusion of our form-based code. I'm gonna try to go through these briefly, and just to give you a little background as we go through each one. So in addition to the form-based code, I'll get to in a little bit. Going into our Article 5 and Section 520, last year, you may not be aware of this, we had Eric Kronberg from Kronberg Architect and Urbanist in Atlanta. They performed a parking study for us, made some recommendations to us that we were waiting to enact until we got to the form-based code. So we're here, and we're going to enact those changes. The things you see in blue are the changes. The reds are strikes that we're changing. Basically, in this particular screen, we're reducing the size of a required parking space, and we're allowing for compact spaces to be in the city, something that's been needed for a while. The compact spaces can be counted towards your minimum, and this would provide some better opportunity and also reduce the amount of actual parking area we're going to require. Let's see here. This was a recommendation by Eric's office to increase the distance to an off-street parking space by another 100 feet. Pretty bland stuff. And when it comes to change of uses, you know, in the city, if we have somebody that changes a use and they have a little bit of parking, not much, this particular change of use requirement is pretty intrusive, would require them to go through some hoops before they could even start the use. We're adding a provision that allows 50% of the required parking to be applied. So if somebody has 5 spaces, they're required to have 10. We can make them work for them. If they need more, they'll need a variance. Let's see, going down the page here, we're going to allow 100% of shared parking instead of just 35%. Why not? This is the innovative way to handle parking moving forward. This is a terrible diagram that's in our code. We're going to get rid of it. The two-way parking is backwards. If you ever look at this and see that the car's angles are off on the first graph, we got to get rid of this, even though we're not going to change much of the degree widths and the aisle widths. They're not going to change, but we're going to make that diagram a little cleaner and a little bit clearer for when parking is going to be designed in the city. This will give those that are designing a little bit better picture of what we're requiring. I'm not going to go into the specifics of all these dimensions. That'll put you to sleep. So this was an Eric Kronberg recommendation too, was to reduce our multifamily parking requirements for 1 and 2 bedroom dwelling units to 1 space, and then 3 bedroom or greater units would have stay at the 1.5. This would be a parking reduction in most sites. For commercial, just going to make it easy. The 1 space per employee plus 3 spaces per lot. I mean, even I, as a regular parking, get bogged down trying to come up with this stuff, and I don't even know how I regulate it to begin with. If the use changes, so we're just going to be clean and go with 3 per 1,000 square feet on spaces. Very clean and simple. Same thing with offices, same thing with lodging. We're just going to trim down the things that are difficult to regulate, difficult to quantify if you're the developer to the city, and just keep things as simple as possible. The numbers that are proposed, like in this case, the bottom, you see the blue 300 square feet of gross floor area for a restaurant. It's proportional to the numbers you're seeing as far as how we're regulating seats and square footage. So we're not just jumping off the page when in our parking regulations. And then you currently require a variance now if you're going over 120%. This clarifies something I'll cover in a minute about what type of variance. So it's a special exception variance. Moving on, this is off-street loading spaces. We're going to reduce the size down to 35 feet. And then we're going to address allowing off-street loading, and on-street loading will be allowed in downtown. We do have loading spaces in downtown now. This just kind of gives some of these businesses a little bit of clarity where they can have their loading and unloading. 610, we're striking the land use table. You know, just to give you a background, 610, 620, 630, and then over on in the CBD, they're all independent land use tables. We're striking those land use tables, clarifying the actual paragraphs that precede the zoning districts for those to address one particular zoning table. And I'll get to that in a second. But we're cleaning up the language here. I'm not going to read all that, but this is basically what's going on here. Same thing with 620, same thing with 630. And then we get to the end of 630. There needs to be a new section introduced called Section 635. This is where we introduce the new land use table as a preceding paragraph that basically was the same language you saw in the one just a moment ago. That language matches the first paragraph. And then in the second paragraph here, I'll make a note that we're adding language to our ordinance that enables the planning and zoning director the ability to interpret based on best uses of interpretation or best land uses that have descriptions, like the NAICS has excellent land use descriptions, including other planning and development references, which I have a number of. That way, if someone comes to us with a land use that's a little bit gray in the land use table, we use those resources to make land use determinations. Pretty straightforward stuff, to be honest with you. This is something that's accompanied in many zoning ordinances. It's never been introduced in ours. We're just strictly to our table only. And when someone comes to us with a gray area type land use, it gets kind of wonky. This will help us out there. Moving on to our land use table. So we're going to go to a kind of a cleaner look. We're going to condense them all down into one land use table. This should be a little easier for staff, for the public, and for anyone who's wanting to, be interested in what's going on with land uses in the city. This should make it easier to navigate and figure out what's going on. So I'm going to briefly just go through the changes that we're proposing to the land use table besides the actual appearance of it. This is the consolidation of all the 4 land use tables. But on this page, I think we are allowing household pets where we allow houses in other districts. Why they're not allowed there now, I don't know. Let's see, moving on. I'll try to read these screens as we go through here. So you can see here, it's real small on the screen, and I apologize, but we're going to change kennels from being permitted in B3 to conditional. That needs to be something that I think the council needs to take a look at when those come up. Let's see, moving on. I don't see anything on this page other than child care centers are going to be, we're adding those to B1. Don't know why they're not in B1 now. They're in every other district as either a conditional or permitted use, so I think we ought to allow those there as conditional uses. Councils would see them when they do come up. Let's see, I don't think there was anything on this page in particular. This one's where there are some heavy lifting changes that are going on. So we get into motor vehicles and equipment, get into car washes, body repair, fuel sales, gas stations, truck stops, you name it. We're going to change all of those from being permitted uses to conditional. The only thing that will remain a permitted use by right would be parts and accessories. So your O'Reillys, your AutoZones, those guys are going to stay just like they are. But anything that's involved with repair or fuel sales, gas, car wash, we're going to put that in front of council. That's the recommendation of staff at this point. We get a lot of inquiries about that. Some of your best real estate in the city could inadvertently be absorbed into land uses that have a limited lifespan. So I think in every instance that this is going to come up, let's let council look at it. Same thing here. This is kind of the conclusion of all those automotive type land uses are all going to be conditional now. Clarifying what's going on with campgrounds. We don't permit them in the city, to my knowledge. So I think they listed as a conditional use in the mobile home parks and R2. I'm not sure what's going on there. I think the recommendation here is just to strike that land use in the city. It's city, not rural. Taking out accessory use behind the word neighborhood center. Don't know why that's there. There's some language in the Article 10 area that deals with neighborhood activity centers that treats it as an accessory, but it is a standalone land use for this purpose in the land use table. Historic sites, I'm not even sure what that is. We're just going to take it out of the land use table. They're only conditional in the residential districts. They're not even allowed in the commercial districts, so I think we just take that out. And then museums, I don't think they should be permitted inside residential districts. We're asking those to be taken out, not conditional uses. Like museums, but I don't think they're appropriate in a residential district. And obviously, any of these land uses, if they ever come up, we can always amend the ordinance and make them come back. The only change on this page, I believe, is about fuel sales, make that conditional in relation to the other fuel-related and automotive-related changes. I'm not sure what a station or terminal is under transportation facilities. I have no idea what that is, but instead of making it permitted by right in B3 and one comes up and I don't know what it is, let's make it conditional so council has to look at it. And that's pretty much the gist of all the big land use changes. The big thing here is we're separating the accessory land uses that are already in your tables now. They're spread across all four, and we're putting them in their own little accessory table, kind of clarifying some of the language there, and making it match up with Article 10. And then we've separated them out into two different categories, residential, non-residential, which kind of coincides with how we handle them, and Article 10. Nothing new here to note other than the fuel part being conditional, and then we're actually allowing home offices in the commercial districts because you allow residential dwelling units in those districts. So there's nothing that would prohibit someone from having a home office or business in those types of dwellings. Moving on, let's see. The only thing that needs to change in the notations, there are a lot of notations. I'm only showing you the one for M1. There were 3 other ones for the R and the B districts. About 40-something notes altogether, but there's this weird paragraph at the end of M1 that talks about how we recognize that older M1 zoning in the city needs to have the ability to have commercial uses, and it just goes on and on and on. It's not real specific, and I don't know what this means in terms of someone comes to me and wants a commercial land use, what land use? I need something specific. With the form-based code that we have coming up, this paragraph is no longer necessary. It truly is not. I think the intent here was kind of leaning towards getting towards a form-based code to address those types of land uses. The form-based code itself will do that. When I'll get to that in a moment. Hopefully I can clarify some of those land uses. Let's see, this is for your corridor design overlay district. The policy change we made last year about signs. Yeah, they're never coming back to you guys again if we adopt it like this. This would allow someone to install signs that meet our ordinance and remove non-conforming signs without the need to come in front of this commission. And we've upped the requirement from $5,000, that's a trigger on a site or a building change, from $5,000 to $25,000. Because $5,000, that's a pretty low bar, and it gets a lot of trigger on things that people are trying to do that are just simple. And we're clarifying the language about buildings or site, not elevations or site plans. So someone has a $15,000 change, it meets our CDL requirement, it'll hit the administrative level. It won't have to come in front of you guys for a little change. This is from Eric Kronberg's parking study, was to change our MHDO requirements. I'm not sure that it really is applicable because much of the MHDO will be absorbed in the form-based code, but we're changing it anyway. It's still in our ordinance. This is the CBD land use table. Like the other ones, it's being removed. Language is being consolidated to address that primary land use table. Same thing with CBD. Signs will be an administrative function, and we're addressing buildings and site. Same thing you just saw a minute ago. I know there's a lot I'm going through, and I apologize for going so fast. So if I'm putting you to sleep, just hit the counter or something, and I'll slow down. So this is in regards to our planned districts. There's a little bit of clarity needed. We're actually including the language now, calling the actual document that you've seen, like Breedlove Farm. You just saw a massive pattern book, right? That's what it's called. It's not really written like that in our ordinance, so we're going to add that language in there and then kind of expand on the standards a little bit. We're going to take out the requirement to go through a CDO application, because if you're adopting a planned district or they're being rezoned to a planned district, they basically are usurping the CDO requirements, because we're asking them to follow them. I'm not going to govern them with both. That's kind of been the case since I've been here, so we're going to clarify that language. Moving on, as far as their site plans, we're just clarifying what's needed. And then what's funny is written in there now is the actual requirement that we preliminary plat it at the same time we zone it. And I've never understood this requirement. We've never done it. We've never asked anyone to provide a subdivision plat. That would be basically not following our development regulations. So we're just taking that out altogether. We just want to see the development plans in the detail that they need, like you just saw with that rezone recently. And then the last thing in this particular section deals with development agreements. I don't know that it's even possible to turn in an actual detailed development agreement prior to zoning, just because of the timing that zoning goes through. And there's a lot of information that needs to be digested by the staff. Calculations have to be done by engineers and so forth and so on. Water and sewer and all those things have to be calculated. We're asking that you can turn it in. That's what we're saying here, is you may turn it in, but we're not requiring you turn it in. So if someone wants to do this in advance, that's fine, but we're going to allow them to turn a draft in as well. So it's not having to be done at the time of zoning action. There is language in here that says that it will be conditioned at the time of zoning approval that they have to go through a development agreement by council. All right, form-based code, fun times. This is something I hope you guys have all been exposed to. With the presentation that we had there 6 weeks ago. There's a lot of information in this. I'm not going to pour it all over you right now, and there's no way I could do it inside a presentation. Our consultant was excellent at going through some of these, and when you watch their presentation, they covered a lot of information. I'm just going to try to hit the highlights and talk about, let's start with the table of contents, just so you get some idea. This will be introduced as Article 7 in your code, and we're going to shift the current Article 7s through 14 up. They're going to be renumbered and re-indexed. But just to give you the highlights, I mean, you have a general applicability section that describes what the form-based code is intended to do and its relationship to the existing zoning of the properties that it's dealing with, in this case, the planned districts only. And I'll touch on that in a little bit. But it talks about when someone applies for a change of use on their property, which starts to get into regulating plan changes or an actual plan submittal requirement. These sections start dealing with that, the ones you see in the early sections there. 710 starts to address your special character districts, or excuse me, your character districts and your special districts. And then each of those districts has standards and requirements. And they're intense, and they're very detailed. And I'm not going to read all of that to you right now. I don't want to hurt you guys. But there is quite a bit of detail and level of information in these. It's quite a lot of information. Let's just compile here in this little presentation. But just to give you the overhead view, the character districts that you're talking about, we're talking about 3 ones that are called CD3, which is a neighborhood scale district, CD4, which is a neighborhood center scale district, and then CD5, urban center, which is kind of basically your current CBD now. And then the mill properties, the Walton Mill and Avondale Mill sites, they're under a special district. And then all of our civic properties, the cemeteries, City Hall, they're all under the civic designation. And the regulating plan that comes along with the adoption of a form-based code, it will be applied to the zoning map. But just for clarity's sake, you get some idea of where this is located in the city. It's around the core of the city and along the primary corridors. I believe the historic districts were also a point of reference for our consultant to designate these districts. I'm not going to go through each one of these properties right now, but I did want you to see these, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at what properties we're changing. The thing I would note on here is that there are several properties that have an existing zoning district now in the city. Grace Church, Avondale Mills, and then there's a Veterans Walk project not developed, currently zoned as a planned district. We changed the code in our last iteration of it after the presentation to make the planned district properties legacies unless they change something. If they want to change something, they're going to bring it in front of City Council, and now will have to comply with the form-based code. But as they exist right now, if they don't change anything, they can stay under their legacy planned district zoning. All righty, fun times. I'm going to give you an example of what one of the character district standards looks like. This is just CD3, so this is the lower neighborhood level sort of district. But the amount of detail that's going to go into each one of these, they're all the same for all of the ones, including the civic district. They all have the same number of standards as far as, like on this page, I know it's not easy to see, but you start with block size, private frontage, civic space type, permitted uses, number of buildings, the actual lot standards themselves. I'll point out in this case, this particular district is 50 feet, and to give you some example, the CD4, which is a more intense, the neighborhood center, is 18 feet. So we're talking about a much smaller lot size, but where we're trying to encourage density. And then when you get into CD5, there is no lot minimum. They're just become block standards at that point, and the architecture goes up substantially as far as what we're requiring. I'm not going to read all these, but you get some idea what's going on here. It's actually quite intuitive and straightforward. Once you start reading, and let's say you wanted a permit, and you started reading this and went down the line of what was applicable to you, it actually becomes very, very clear. So there are quite a few building standards. I'm not going to read all these. The building types are identified in each character district. So in this case, you can see the P's up by cottage, house, and duplex. We're going to allow those in the CD3 district, but we're not going to allow large multifamily, small multifamily in CD3. You get into CD4, you see those start to change. We start to allow those. You get into CD5, and pretty much all those are kind of flipped around. We get away from cottages and houses, and we get more towards the higher density residential uses in the CD5 area. I'm just going to kind of clip through these. You get some idea. There are quite a few standards that go along with each one of the character districts. Each one of those has their own level of details. The thing I like about this form-based code, too, you get into some really specific lot requirement descriptions that make things a lot clearer about when someone's approaching staff or when someone's trying to develop a lot. This is going to be a lot easier for those folks to digest. A little bit more of clarity to help them develop. We start to define in form-based code the types of buildings that are going to be allowed. We really don't do that now. We're more single-family, commercial, apartment house, right? This gets into more detail about what those are going to be like as far as splitting apart multifamily buildings. We don't really do that now. This one does that based on the number of units in the building. Then there's the live-work building, which we don't have in our code now, a flex building. Then you have mid-rises and civic buildings as you get towards downtown. If you haven't read all the little specific details about what's intended for those types of buildings and their uses, it's pretty neat. It's actually not a far cry from what we're currently doing now in the city for some of those buildings in downtown. The other thing we don't have in our ordinance now is thoroughfare types. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but there are very specific details to how streets should be laid out. That includes your public realm, your street realm, your landscape, sidewalk, and up to the frontages of each home. It's pretty well laid out. I'm not going to go through all those details. And then the big thing to me at the end, there are a lot better sign standards in this form-based code that will only apply to those character districts. I think eventually we probably could apply these citywide. We're not asking council or you guys to recommend that to be the case tonight. I'm not going to show you all those. There are a lot of them. But they're really easy for us, and it'll be easier for the public too, I think. Just a lot more descriptive and a lot more flexible for someone trying to do signs. That's it on the form-based code. I could go following up with that part. We have to renumber all those articles that I mentioned. That would be 8 through, now it'll be now 16. They all have to be bumped out. And then I think I'd advertised a change in Article 7. We're not going to do that one. Or excuse me, Table 10 is not going to have any changes. Currently right now in your sign regs, there's a section on sign variances. You also have a section in your procedures about variances. These are a little conflictive to me because, and just in dealing with signs, you're never going to create a hardship for a sign. It's just not possible. There's almost no instance where someone is not creating their own hardship when they ask for a sign variance. There's not been one presented to the city since I've been here. It's been practiced everywhere I've had experience to not have these in your ordinance for constitutional reasons. So I'm recommending that we remove these in their entirety, especially if we adopt the form-based code sign standards across the board. They're not going to be anything that's going to prohibit a business from having a viable sign. I'll put it like that. Okay, so moving on to the section about sign variances. We're adding some language here in the beginning paragraph about the city council or the planning and zoning director. We're going to expand our variance types, basically. And I think I mentioned that here where we're coming up. We're kind of clarifying some of the language here in what the application standards are. Nothing significant here. Changing some of the language around so it's a little clearer for staff. But, you know, our current standards for variance, we're just going to wipe this out and start over with a new section that deals with different types of variances. And this will be clear in a second. So we're proposing to add at least two types of variances, one special exception and one hardship. And under the special exception ones, there would be an administrative option. But first, special exceptions deal only with building setbacks, building height, automobile parking requirements, screening, buffering, and landscaping, and lot coverage, which is not necessarily things that are created by hardships. These are things that are their design requirements of our code that are not something that affect a property in such a negative way that they have to have a variance, if that makes sense. Our ordinance is what requires variance in most cases. If someone wants to change a requirement that makes sense, such as a building height, this is a different type of variance that would permit that. We're creating standards for those as far as, they're no different than your hardship standards now, but they're a little bit different as far as, is this affecting our ordinance in a negative way? And is this going to diminish property values and affect your neighbors? Which gets to the administrative special exception variances. This would be a staff level approval, but it's only for a percentage of building setbacks or building heights. I would only be able to, and I say I, the planning director, myself, the person sitting in this position would only be able to grant a person that walked in off the street, they're trying to get a building permit, let's say they have an issue with a foot on a 10-foot setback, staff would be able to grant a special exception variance. This would be something they would have to pay a fee for, there would be an application, this would be filed, and it would be carried with the property at the city level. Like, we would know that there's a variance with that and why we granted the variance. The thing I may suggest here that I don't have in this proposal would be if someone's having a building setback reduction, may be that they have a letter from their neighbor as a requirement to be approved. If their neighbor's opposed to it, then I think obviously it could go to the council level and not the staff level, so we don't end up, in a situation. Same standards would apply to a special exception variance there. Can't be something that would negatively affect the adjoining property owners or impair our ordinance. And then finally, we do have a hardship variance. We'll keep this in the ordinance, but we're going to change some of the language a little bit. This is more in tune with most other ordinances that I deal with, that I've seen in my career, about issues with size, shape, and topography, which obviously are issues to grant variances. If that's not something that the property owner has created and that's an issue, those are certainly reasons to grant a variance. But we're also going to limit the ability to apply for one if it's something that was created by a real estate transaction or a bad investment decision. These are not things that are reasons to grant variances. So we're just spelling that out here in the standards for hardship variances. And that is all that I have. How long did it take me to do that? 30 minutes.
Pretty good.
Any questions? So, we need to vote on this tonight, right?
Yeah, you're making a recommendation to
Make a
council on these
recommendation
changes.
to approve it, or,
Absolutely.
okay.
The only thing I would mention too is that at the meeting here tonight, a draft of what the map would look like is presented. I didn't have it in the slideshow. There's just too much detail to put on that screen and make any sense at all. It's just a big colory mess on the screen. But it was here at the meeting tonight, available for the public.
Right. And also, as available to the public, I would need to ask if there were anyone present to speak in opposition to the approval of the form-based code. Seeing none, to give you the opportunity to, seeing none, then I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve as presented. And a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved.
All right.
Good job.
There's a lot. I could keep going. I mean, I could read all that mess.
Is this meeting adjourned?
Yes, I'm gonna entertain a motion now to adjourn.
Motion to
Motion
adjourn.
and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.